We've invited the candidates formally. They've all signed an agreement. We're happy to have them all here. I think we're missing one person, but coming from an airport, so we'll get them later. Each candidate will have 2 minutes of opening, and then as they're finished, and we have an order for that, for the county board order, it will be Katie Crystal first, Audrey Clement second, Aaron Odell third, and Christian Dorothy fourth. And if you would like to take your places at the table here, that would be great. After the opening statement, if you wish to ask a question, you'll come to the mic furthest away from the table and ask your question. You have 30 seconds. I would encourage you not to make comments, just ask the question. We can figure it out, okay? All right. So with that being said, and this was done by drawing, so I'll have Katie go ahead. And you just push. You just push that. This is a new system. There you go.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Welcome.
What I have always loved about Arlington County, part of the reason I made my home here in the first place, is that I believe this is a community full of people who believe in something bigger than themselves. Local government is an exercise in coming together collectively to do what we can't do individually. And in some communities, that starts and ends with paving the streets. And if that is what is most important to you, I will say that we have improved our local paving index by a number of points over the past few years and have a plan to invest $138 million over the next 10 in paving. But in Arlington, I have found this is a place that believes in greater potential of our collective effort to solve big, hard problems. And I'm asking for your vote tonight because I believe that over the last 4 years, I've led in the spirit of that tradition. Since I was last at this forum in 2015, we have made progress on the issues that matter for Arlingtonians. We've adopted a comprehensive strategy to address childcare accessibility, and it's working. We approved over 1,200 spots just in 2017 and 2018. As a leader in multiple transit bodies and in deep collaboration with my colleague Christian Dorsey, I'm proud to have contributed to the extraordinary milestone of dedicated capital funding for our metro system, a first in the system's history. We've added over 1,000 new committed affordable homes, we've acted to preserve garden apartments, and we've expanded opportunities for new housing types. As a result, there are now more homes affordable in Arlington for neighbors, moderate income neighbors, than there were 4 years ago, even as rents have increased. And importantly, I've endeavored to do all of these things for our community while exercising good fiscal stewardship. I have supported needed capital projects in the county while fighting to significantly reduce their cost. We've reduced use permit conditions and duplicative community processes to keep schools projects on budget. And during my chairmanship last year, the board worked to keep the tax rate flat because I believed that the burden of then declining commercial revenues needed to be balanced. I'm running for re-election because I think we have more big things to do together. I'm looking forward to sharing some of my policy priorities and hearing yours tonight, and I encourage you to grab a piece of our campaign literature or visit katiecrystal.com for more information on the things I'll be prioritizing. And sincerely, thank you for the opportunity to lead in this extraordinary community over the past 4 years. I hope we can continue to work together to make a bigger impact than just ourselves.
Dr. Clement?
Good evening. I'm Audrey Clement, PhD, independent candidate for Arlington County Board, a 15-year Westover resident, longtime civic activist, and member of the Transportation Commission. Why am I running? Because my opponents, Katie and Christian, indulge in doublespeak rather than honest communication and fail to provide the meaningful oversight and leadership that Arlington needs. Katie and Christian say they want to preserve trees, yet in 2018 they allowed a developer to chop down a 75-year-old state champion Don Redwood near a Potomac watershed in North Arlington and replaced it with a McMansion. Even though our Chesapeake Bay ordinance expressly prohibits redevelopment that increases runoff near Chesapeake Bay tributaries. My opponents claim to support affordable housing, yet they've permitted dozens of market-rate affordable garden apartments in Westover Village to be raised, replacing them with luxury townhouses and flooded streets. For over 3 years, Katie and Christian have been sitting on a citizen petition to preserve historic buildings in Westover and denied a legally required public hearing on the matter. My opponents say they support the poor and middle class, yet they approved a $23 million handout to Amazon, a multi-billion-dollar corporation that paid zero federal income tax in 2017 and 2018. Aren't you tired of board members' constant doublespeak? If so, I offer you change. If elected, I will do what I say and say what I mean. I will also say no to tax rate increases and pay grabs by the county board. Insist that developers pay their fair share for public infrastructure. Develop a flood prevention and mitigation program. Install renewable energy on county-owned buildings, and provide a voice for all taxpayers on county board.
Mr. Odell.
Good evening. Thank you all again for coming. Hopefully some of you are here to learn something about me and not just to support the incumbents tonight. I'm a single father, and today has been a little bit on the hectic side. This has been the first day of school and a new after-school program for my daughter, and then this. But I'm happy to be here today, and hopefully you'll like what I have to say. A bit of my history. I was born in D.C. I've lived in the Arlington area almost my entire life. When I did leave, I was traveling overseas. I spent 3 years in Costa Rica and 4 years in Thailand, where I did teaching. And I've come back to Arlington because I want the best opportunities for my daughter. I think the schools here are fantastic. I apologize if I'm a little bit rough tonight. I haven't done public speaking in about 3 or 4 years, so I'm a little bit rusty. But it's kind of amazing how quickly we lose the skills that we don't use all the time. And that's one of the reasons why I'm running. Spending. Being a single income household in Arlington, I'm constantly scraping and searching my budget to find new ways to get more for my dollar. And at work, I do grant accounting and accounts payable, and I'm always trying to find better value and maximize the dollars that we get. So, you see, the board members sometimes seem to have the opposite problem that I have. They're pretty eloquent when it comes to doing public speaking and events like this, but when they have their hands on the tax lever and ever-growing budgets from prices of real estate raising, they sometimes forget how to find value and keep costs down. I don't disagree with most of the projects that the board has been trying to do and proposing. I just want to see a county board that works from necessity and utility and maximizes value for planning for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you to the Civic Federation for hosting this forum and for you all for attending. 4 years ago, I promised progressive, principled, and inclusive leadership, and I am here tonight confident that I've delivered on that promise. To fulfill the promise that I made 4 years ago of maximizing the value of each and every tax dollar, I am proud that we have controlled the costs of major capital projects and that the operating budgets of our county have grown less than regional comparators. And we've been able to invest in our community along the way. I am proud to have championed an initiative that created a Consumer Protection Bureau to ensure that people are not subject to being victims of fraudulent business practices. And at the same time, I was proud to join with my colleague Katie Crystal to ensure that Arlington was the first jurisdiction in Virginia to provide legal services to immigrants who were threatened by Trump's policies. To address our most persistent policy challenge, I am proud that we have created several thousand affordable units, many of them located within walking distance of Metro Rail, creating broadly distributed units throughout our county. And I was honored to be the first individual selected by Northern Virginia peer jurisdictions to serve as our voting member of the Metro Board to ensure that that principal asset is maintained in a state of good repair. I am proud of all of these things and the progress that we have made, but I am certainly not satisfied, and I have a passion for continuing to lead Arlington to realize its full potential. This year, I introduced equity as a lens through which we should make governmental decisions so that we don't have residents who have their outcomes in life negatively influenced by their social characteristics. And I'm laser focused on ensuring that the economic growth that we anticipate is both inclusive and equitable. No greater imperative exists for us than making sure that we are resilient in the face of climate change, and I will ensure that we develop effective projects to mitigate climate effects while also making the energy investments to ensure a carbon-free future. I want and I hope that you all will agree that Arlington should be known principally as a place where everyone has an opportunity to thrive and to realize their dreams. It is through the experience that I've gained over the last 4 years that I think I am able to take us, if I am so fortunate to have you grant me another term, to have us actually move to that destination. Thank you.
Thank you. If any of you would like to ask the candidates questions, if you could come up to the microphone, let me set it.
Last spring, start off.
It needs to be pushed on the top.
Okay, you gotta press on that.
Last, no, press on. Last. Last, okay. I love technology. Last spring, the Civic Federation voted unanimously, with one exception, to ask the county board to defer, to consider the 1101 Lee Highway parcel separately, immediately for the purpose of it, to determine its future. This is a parcel which is on county property, county purchased 5 years ago. The purpose was ostensibly left open at the county board meeting. Some people said it should be a park, other people said it should be a boathouse facility or an ancillary facility. Recently, so this is right near in Roslyn, it's just a little bit east of Lynn Street. It's presently wooded. And we're supposed to protect forests and woodlands, trees in this county. So the county, the Civic Association voted to, almost unanimously, to ask the county to consider doing this.
Do you have a question, please?
Now, the question is therefore, because the important thing is that the National Park Service is going ahead with, so their recommendation is to use it as an ancillary boathouse facility. The Civic Federation has asked for a public process before this occurs immediately to
Mr. Byrne, your time is up.
What this is.
Could you ask a
Yes,
question?
could you please answer, will you hold that public process that you announced when you acquired the property within a reasonable time, so that and before the NPS makes a decision, we hold that public process. So it was promised to us. So that's each candidate. This was announced about the county board meeting.
We got your question, thank you.
Particular order, would you like me to go ahead and
Yeah,
start?
why don't you start this way and we'll go back and forth.
All right, so thank you for the question. So, not to get into a long extended answer, I will say that we will have a master planning process for that parcel. The question of when is going to be dictated by, when the NPS concludes its study. So the promise of conducting a process to plan for that site is something that we're absolutely committed to. I believe we have a structure with the Public Spaces Master Plan that we approved just this past April, which outlines the considerations that will go into that public process. So that will happen at a time where we feel like it's appropriate for it to commence.
Anyone else?
Next question.
Are we going in order? Aaron, do you want to go?
Just go down this row from Mr. Dorsey and Mr. O'Dell.
When it comes to the boathouse, I thought that was a great idea. I didn't realize the parcel had been promised somewhere else. So I'd like to learn more about it before I was going to be able to make a clear decision on what I thought should be done.
Okay, first of all, I want everyone to know that I'm an avid kayaker. I've been kayaking on the Potomac since 1997. So I'm all for a boathouse. However, I'm also for county board abiding by its own policies. And one of its policies requires an open public process for that site. In fact, the section requiring it was just written into the Public Spaces Master Plan this past spring. But I think that Mr. Dorsey's response to the question illustrates the problem of doublespeak. How can you have a public process when the county board unanimously approved, I believe it was in May, the plan to redevelop that site without a public process? And I believe when Katie Crystal was questioned about it at that hearing, or recently, she said that she thought there was an exception here because she felt that that site had already been planned for in the past. So, folks, what I'm stressing here is not whether people are for or against a boathouse. I want people to be for or against doublespeak.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne. Thank you for asking the question and continuing to engage. As Mr. Dorsey said, there will be a master planning process ahead for that site, as there have been for our parks planning, for our parks throughout the county, so that we can think about how it will be configured, how people will have access to it, how we'll protect existing resources, etc. Essentially, to work with the public to engage what it will look like. The idea that a boathouse will be there, however, is the result of a public process, one that took place at this point a couple of decades ago. And sometimes it does take a long time for things to come to fruition in Arlington, particularly when they require partnership or land acquisition with federal agencies, in this case, the National Park Service. But I do believe there needs to be a standard of finality, a way in which we honor when the community does come together, express its desire, express its will. The board at the time voted to include the boathouse in the capital improvement plan. It's been included for years since. All of these have been public processes. I don't think that we can treat every step along the way of a capital development plan as an opportunity to reevaluate everything. I don't think that honors the work and the time that our community members put into it.
I just want to say you missed the point. This is not part of the boathouse. Yeah. It's a boathouse ancillary facility. It's not the boathouse. All the people did not respond properly.
If you could just keep it to a question, that would be great. Thank you, Rick.
Rick Epstein, Arlington Forest. Many of us in the county are concerned about densification in the county and its attendant impacts. Overcrowded schools, increasing tax burden, increasing traffic. I think we're very much aware of these things. So I would like to know from the candidates, do you support the current pace of development? Do you think we should take a breather perhaps and decide where we want to go? Where do you see this going during the next 4 years?
Same order.
Why don't you start that way?
Mr. Epstein, thank you. This is, I think, one of the biggest questions about the future of Arlington, and I know that there's a diversity of citizen input. I do believe that I speak straightforwardly about my positions, and so I will be straightforward on this one. A synonym for development is housing. Should there be more housing in Arlington County? We know this population is projected to grow. This is a job center, the DC region. And we have seen throughout the country, and in fact throughout the globe, what happens when cities see population growing and don't allow enough housing for it. We get dramatic unaffordability problems. We get crises of homelessness, for example, like the one that San Francisco has seen. I know that there are more people coming to Arlington County. People come from all over the world to Arlington County, and in fact, our population increase is largely driven by global immigration, which is something this county has always prided itself on being. So do I think there needs to be more housing in Arlington County as the population grows? Yes, I do. I do, however, believe that it is my job to make sure that we plan for the infrastructure for the people who are coming, to make sure that we have the transit systems, which I have fought for consistently, whether it's Metro, the Virginia Railway Express, or our local ART bus system, so that people can come without bringing their cars along with them. I believe that it's critical that we plan for our student population, our school population growth. I'm proud to have worked closely with the school board on a number of our new facilities, including 3 that opened their doors today. And I'm advocating for a long-term plan, a schools element of a comprehensive plan that will help our community see how our school system can grow, not just over the next 10 years of our CIP, but for the 30 or 40 after that. I believe that we can welcome more neighbors, avoid a fate of cities that have tried to pull up the drawbridge and instead dealt with escalating housing costs and homelessness, while still maintaining the quality of life that we value as Arlingtonians.
Well, I would
I would characterize
Arlington's growth as housing growth as growth on steroids. In Ballston alone, it's been projected that 3,000 new units will have been added over the past 5 years. They're either built, they're in the pipeline, or they're under construction. And meeting a housing demand is fine if you also if you address the impacts of that densification, and that is something that the county board is simply not doing. It is simply throwing these considerations under the rug. We are not giving adequate consideration to the transportation, schools, or public safety impacts of this growth, and most especially, we're not giving adequate consideration to the impacts on our green space. For the new Harris Teeter site that is planned on Glebe Road, we are providing 0.6 of an acre pocket park for something like 1,000 new residents. This is totally unacceptable. We cannot continue in this particular vein. Yet, in addition to that, it is clear that the county board is considering upzoning single-family neighborhoods in this county, and Katie herself addresses this on her website. She sees this as a plus. She said, pursuing new zoning reforms to increase the supply of middle-class ownership, home types like duplexes, fourplexes, and small cottages, all of these would be...
We have 90 seconds to response.
Okay, these would supplant the single-family homes that are currently in many parts of the county. Other people criticize this as the wrong approach. They say this is not about affordable housing. This is about enabling developers and builders to line their pockets by opening up more buildable lots.
Time is up, please. Time is up.
Density and population growth is an interesting thing. I don't think we're working on it in the right direction. I think we should be focusing first on the infrastructure, particularly like when we look at traffic and roadways and transportation. We should be trying to figure out ways to move people before we figure out where we're building the houses. If we plan growth around transportation, we can reduce or eliminate pockets of traffic and make the county better for everyone, including the people in the lower density areas, because they'll be closer to strategically placed high density zones that will have transportation for them. I think going at it from saying, should we build more houses here or there, is backwards. And if we keep looking at it the old way and trying to redevelop lots and add more housing into the same space, we're going to run into a problem if we're not planning for the green spaces and transportation first.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Epstein, for the question. You know, I do agree with Mr. Odell that planning new housing, new residents should take place where you've made those investments in transit corridors that work, and that's been very much Arlington's story over the last 30 years. And Mr. Epstein and I have chewed over this issue and had many lively discussions about densification, and while I certainly think that a primary focus of the county board is to manage growth in accordance with land use policies that do take into account connectivity and the ability to move people. One of the things that I do not subscribe to is the belief that Arlington has grown on steroids. In fact, no matter how you slice it over the last 20, 30 years, Arlington's growth, somewhere around 1.4% on average per year, if you look at the last 20 or 30 years, is very much the pace of a moderate growth community. It's not a community that's growing on steroids. In fact, during the period of the 40s, 50s, and 60s, Arlington grew at far faster rates in shorter periods of time. I bring that up to say that managing growth is actually what we do well, and what we have to continue to do by focusing on those transit corridors where we've made those investments, taking great care to make sure that we don't create unsustainable circumstances with public school growth, and that's very much what we have been keen on doing. So the whole idea of closing up shop is not something that we can do. We're taking a pause, as Mr. Epstein mentioned. That's not something that can practically happen in a community that, one, is governed by strong property rights, and that, B, is part of a dynamic region where a lot of people want to live here. But when you consider all of those circumstances, the fact that we have grown at about 1.5% per year over the last 20 years plus is a testament to that.
Thank you.
Jesse Bating, Green Valley. How many housing units would need to be added in order to meet the affordable housing goals? And how many of those units would need to be added to deem housing affordable? Yep.
So thank you, Ms. Bating. It's a difficult question to ask because we don't exist in a vacuum in Arlington. I'll give you some macro figures. In order to not have structural unaffordability, so that is population growth which exceeds the creation of housing units, not just in Arlington, but within our region, we know that we have to produce essentially 75,000 additional units than what the region is already planning for over the course of the next 15 years. That's a regional goal. Within that, Arlington has a portion. It's a fairly small portion. Most of that growth is going to fall on Fairfax and the District of Columbia and some other exurban communities, but Arlington certainly does have a fair share. That's how we meet the level of not having structural unaffordability, that we have rising demand that exceeds our supply. If you then want to go to the next level, how do we actually make sure housing is available for people at the income levels that Arlingtonians are? That's a different conversation that's going to take other factors into consideration, the growth of wages and income, et cetera. But the point is, we need to at least, in my opinion, reach the goals of our affordable housing master plan for at least 700 committed units, and then making sure our overall supply meets at least the demand that we expect in our region.
Mr. Odell?
Yeah, you're correct. We do have to add a lot of units, and you can't just add units to Arlington County to correct the problem for the whole region. The problems that you face with growth in cities is not one that can be addressed with one neighborhood or with one county. It's something that has to be done as part of a bigger group effort, and that's really vital, that you can communicate with the other counties in the region, as well as not just Virginia, but also in Maryland. There's plenty of inexpensive land, if you look right across the Potomac River, that's not being developed. So Arlington shouldn't have to take the brunt of adding houses, but they definitely need to add some.
Well, I certainly wouldn't dispute the estimates provided tonight on how much housing Arlington will have to construct. What I am disputing is the cost and the impacts of producing that housing. Also, the notion that somehow more housing will reduce cost is clearly a misperception. In fact, the Fed said regarding upzoning, which I mentioned earlier, the implication of this finding is that even if a city were able to ease some supply constraints to achieve a marginal increase in its housing stock, the city will not experience a meaningful reduction in rental burdens. Add 5% more housing to the most expensive neighborhoods and the rents would drop by only 0.5%. Another misperception that has been bandied by the board is the notion that we have somehow kept pace with housing demand. Yes, we have constructed 8,000 CAFs, but what they don't tell you is that we've lost 14,000 market rate affordable units over the past 10 or 15 years. So I think that while I will not dispute the need to construct housing, I do dispute both some of the numbers that the board has presented about the progress we have made, and I would also dispute the efficacy of more densification, which can only lead to increased real estate values and therefore increased rents and also the supposed benefits of upzoning single-family neighborhoods, which I strongly oppose.
Thank you. And Ms. Hayden, thank you for the questions. It's a good one, and I think it raises an important question about the distinction between affordable housing and housing affordability. With regard to affordable housing, I think Christian did a nice job of explaining the goals that we have for creating committed affordable units. We know that those are homes for our neighbors making 60% or less of area median income that we actively subsidize or that we use land use tools to develop. The broader question, though, too, is how do we create an Arlington that has home options that are affordable to folks making 80 or 90% of the area median income? And that's where I bring up housing affordability, because I actually believe that we've made good progress on that, especially for middle income folks when it comes to the rental market, but less so when it comes to the ownership market. So Dr. Clement's comments notwithstanding, the laws of supply and demand do apply in Arlington County. If you add more supply to meet demand, prices don't go up as fast. And we've seen that with our rental market. We actually, since 2001, the average apartment rent has only increased about 2.7% in Arlington. At the same time, the average Arlington single-family house price has increased 5.5% in that same time period. And it's because we've added a fair amount of more apartment rental housing and very little single-family product. So when you hear us talk about alternative housing forms, what we're really talking about is a chance for middle-income earners to have a fair shot at buying into Arlington County. A townhouse was what let my husband and I make our home here when we were ready to buy a house. And I believe that without that type of product for young families, for seniors looking to downsize, and for others seeking to make an investment, Arlington will lose its shot at being able to be the kind of place where middle-class folks can put and keep roots.
My question is about an issue that affects every single resident. Oh, I'm sorry. Kit Norland, Arlington Church and Group in Williamsburg. It's about an issue that affects every single resident of Arlington, and that is the health of our environment. We're increasing impervious surface by at least 9 acres a year. And that is causing things like the catastrophic flooding, many other factors. But my question for you is, what specific steps do you have for preserving habitat and trees that provide so many benefits for the air quality for every single resident, mitigate flooding, combat climate change, as Mr. Dorsey referred to? How can we both develop and preserve a healthy environment? Thank you.
Go ahead. Thank you very much. And Ms. Norland, thank you for your ongoing advocacy on this important issue. Let me talk broadly about trees throughout the county, and then I want to get to single-family home redevelopment, which I know has been one of the biggest drivers of what you've described, the loss of permeable surfaces, as well as trees coming down. Broadly speaking, one of the best opportunities we have actively to control our destiny is to grow the number of trees on county property, which actually has been a bright spot in our tree canopy story and something that I continue to remain very committed to. I also am very excited about developing and fleshing out a series of goals around biophilic cities. The idea that in our commercial areas where the development is densest, we can take steps to preserve and plant more and sustain the long-term health of street trees, trees in parks, etc., as well as take steps like bird-friendly glass, ways that we can make our more dense areas of the county more loving of nature and the people who love nature. With regard to single-family housing redevelopment, that absolutely has been a recurring challenge, not only for our neighbors, but for us on the county board. As I think has been alluded to elsewhere, we are restricted from preventing a developer from tearing down a tree in most cases. Christian and I and our colleagues often push our staff very hard in given instances when beautiful, majestic trees are being proposed to come down. We don't have the full complement of tools to literally prevent that, but we have been advocating hard at the General Assembly each year to at least get the power to incentivize the preservation of trees during redevelopment.
Thank you.
Okay, all right, to be continued, but thank you.
Well, on the subject of biophilic cities, Katie's website says it means to prioritize natural spaces and features in our land use planning and site plan review processes. Okay, then why has she approved a boathouse facility that will denude Roslyn of one of its few remaining wooded lots without the benefit of a promised public planning process? I mean, isn't that what biophilic cities is about? Now, as far as what I would do if elected about biophilic cities, first and foremost, I would lobby my members to deny permits to APS for any construction project that it has in mind that involves the demolition of mature trees. That there would have to be a very high bar set for them to justify such activity. For example, the new Reed School is going to involve the demolition of no less than 40 mature trees, and I am told that most of those are not even on the building's footprint. They're on a lot that's not even going to be built on. Also, Suzanne Sundberg, a prominent civic activist, has documented that the county has destroyed over 900 mature trees on lots throughout the county that it has developed over the past 5 or 10 years. And so my first priority, therefore, would be to stop that on public property.
Thank you.
Now,
So I think we need to look at green growth. We need to go more vertical with buildings and smaller footprints. Give more space when you put up a house to have more park. We should look at models of cities that already do this and are successful. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can look at what countries like Singapore do and do the positive steps to create more park space in our city. I mean, we're at a crossroads here where the county could go different directions. If we go just haphazard with the way we build and continue to develop the county, we could end up with a city that's more like Bangkok or something that's a complete, dirty, disastrous mess. Or we could go someplace that's well-planned and well-thought with lots of green space and open areas that everybody can have a chance to enjoy. If we don't focus on creating green spaces as we increase population, we're going to have a place that's unlivable. We'll have a corridor that looks like Glebe Road by Ballston. It's just a canyon of concrete and glass. And I don't think anybody really enjoys to walk down Glebe Road. I think people would much rather walk down George Mason.
Thank you.
So one of the things that I would love to have us focus on as a community, and thank you for the question, Ms. Norland, is that the whole idea of development being incompatible with biophilic principles and actually environmental sustainability. It's not. In fact, we have examples thanks to good advocacy from the community and certainly better thought leadership coming from our staff professionals, where you can actually bring the both together in projects. I'll give you one example. There's one that's just about to be completed, George Mason and Columbia Pike. It's an apartment building that's replacing what was a low-level strip mall. It's a lot of density, it's a lot of housing, but it's also creating an urban habitat that very much adheres to biophilic principles, has a pollinator garden that's going to be the largest that we've had created in recent memory in the county. We're getting that with new development. If we apply those principles to new development, we actually improve the ability of our community to be sustainable over what in many cases is the status quo. That project that I just described replaced a bunch of brick and asphalt. And we're going to actually have the ability for, again, pollinators to be attracted to this area, as well as people to enjoy nature. This is something that we are applying in many different ways, but understand that it is dealing with decades of lack of awareness about sustainability principles that have pretty much governed our community's growth. That's not an excuse, it's just a fact. But applying these in the future is going to be incredibly important to make sure that we do make efficient use of land so that we can, if trees need to be replaced, they can have groves of trees that can flourish into the future.
Cindy, how many more do we have time for?
After this one, I think we'll do, each of you ask your questions, and if the candidates would answer in 30 seconds instead of 9.
Hi, I'm Don Gurney, the League of Women Voters. What are your two top priorities regarding Amazon's arrival in Arlington? And what do you view as the challenges and/or opportunities that this presents to county and towards implementation of those priorities?
All right, thank you very much.
After this one.
Oh, this is still 90?
Yeah.
Good. All right, so thank you for the question. Amazon does, in my opinion, present both opportunities and challenges. The opportunity is really to significantly reduce the strain on residential taxpayers that has been borne with the level of commercial vacancy that we have experienced. It allows us to fully realize a sector plan for a transit corridor where we've planned this density to take advantage of existing assets. That's great opportunity. The challenges come with the unknown consequences that it may place, particularly on housing and displacement of people who are currently moderate and low income. That is something that has been important in our prioritizing getting resources from the state that have never been available to Arlington County due to our relative affluence to deal with those particular issues. It's also going to require the board to be very much working in conjunction with Alexandria to ensure that this growth that's coming as a result of Amazon, which also includes an incredible investment of $1 billion over on the Alexandria side, results in inclusive growth for all. That's something that you're going to be hearing me talk about ad nauseum as we work to create concrete arrangements with our neighbors to deal with those very issues. But the opportunities to me are incredibly worthwhile for everyone in Arlington. And even as we try to make sure that Amazon doesn't crowd out low and moderate income vulnerable populations,
Thank you.
I also see it as a great chance for those people to get middle class sustaining jobs. Thank you.
Boy, give an inch in them.
So Amazon has always been kind of a big concern for me because we're replacing the federal government with another big entity that's going to come in and possibly someday down the road leave. So we're creating a possibility for another future giant vacuum. One of the big things that we should be looking at with the move for Amazon into the area is not just transportation that goes around the county, but transportation that goes from outside of the county. We should be looking at creating new pathways or new public transportation that goes to further out, to Alexandria, into Maryland, all over DC, through things other than the bus and train that we currently have. Those routes aren't going to be able to sustain the population that's coming in and the number of workers that will be working there. I think that Arlington has a lot of potential to get other businesses from that, and that should be the key focus, is getting lots of small businesses to follow behind Amazon to help disperse the one big entity that's coming in. That will give us more sustainability and less risk as things go on. We don't want another situation where everybody leaves and you're stuck with
Thank you.
offices.
My objectives, my two principal objectives with respect to Amazon are to educate the public about the actual net benefit and who will receive that net benefit. Now, Stephen Fuller Institute at George Mason originally estimated a net benefit, that is revenues minus expenditures for each person, each hire, and their families in this county at $52 million. Later, he reduced that number to $26 million in light of the fact that 25,000 of those jobs were going to go to New York State and have not yet been relocated elsewhere. The county, meanwhile, estimated a $32 million net benefit, providing no substantiating information. Now, Fuller did substantiate his numbers, but he had one principal error, and that is he used the wrong estimate for education cost, and the amount of that error was about $87 million. When that number is corrected, the actual net benefit of Amazon in this county comes to about $17 million. Now, you got to ask yourself, is that really worth the investment of the state of Virginia and the county in the infrastructure that will be provided free of charge to Amazon? Also, let's assume that it is worth that. I mean, it obviously is a positive benefit, however small, it is a benefit.
Thank you.
We have an extraordinary opportunity for regional transportation, exactly as Mr. Adele was talking about. It's one of the things I'm most fired up about. In my role as a county board member, I also get to serve on regional bodies. I'm currently the chair of the operations board of the Virginia Railway Express, the Commonwealth's only commuter rail that brings folks in from as far south as Fredericksburg to a one-seat ride, right to Crystal City where this new HQ is going. The opportunity to expand that sort of regional rail, eventually to create, with an expansion of the Long Bridge, bi-directional service, off-peak weekend service, through connections to the MARC trains, we have a chance to truly grow as a region, and as others have said, to make sure Arlington isn't shouldering alone the burden of providing housing for all of the people who will come to be here. So this is a huge priority. I believe that the opportunity for Amazon to come helped spur the type of conversation that ultimately led to that breakthrough of a regional agreement for metro capital funding. And I believe that it can spur so much more cooperation across the region. I'm very excited about those opportunities. Another top priority for me, we were talking about biophilia, building cities that are green. We have an opportunity to see a total reshaping of Crystal City, which is indeed a concrete canyon right now, to the type of community that actually respects its role in fighting climate change by creating net zero buildings, as well as creating the type of biophilia, the green roofs, the bird-friendly grass, the street trees that make this a really desirable place. If you've had an opportunity to see the Amazon headquarters in Seattle, it really, I think, can present a blueprint for what we can do in terms of creating more greenery and a better environment in Crystal City.
Okay, so 30 seconds, regular, and I know this is going to be hard, but 30 seconds for you guys. And after he asks this question, you'll start.
Matthew Hurt, I'm a renter in the Arlington Heights neighborhood. Several years ago, former Delegate Rob Krupika penned a letter to the editor writing that it was difficult to open a business in Arlington due to the hurdles in place set by county government. Given the commercial vacancy rate and rather than incentivizing well-connected big businesses to move to the county, what hurdles will you break down to allow far more businesses to develop and grow?
Question. Rob's business, Sugar Shack, is a couple blocks away from my house. We've had a lot of conversations about this, and I believe we're making progress. One of the biggest ones, and I'm going to keep it to 30 seconds, Permit Arlington. This is a huge initiative of our county manager with the support of the board to make it easier to get your construction permits, get your project moving, move it through faster, submit proposals online, have more predictability in that process. That is one of the biggest things that our small businesses have asked of us. I'm really proud of the progress that we've made. Certainly more to come, and more listening to our small businesses and finding ways to make sure that they are supported in a retail environment where rents are going up.
It can be done.
Well, I certainly support small business development, and that's precisely the problem with Arlington's economic development right now. It's focusing on big ticket tenants like Amazon and Lidl and Nestle and Gerber, and there are a few more that I've missed, corporate CEP board, whatever. These are all big ticket tenants, and we are subsidizing their moves into this county at the expense of retaining small business.
Thank you.
Okay, pop-up businesses. We have pop-up restaurants, we have other pop-up shops that come around during holidays and different times like that. We need to develop a center in some of the empty office space that could be used for small offices to pop up and establish themselves. Maybe giving people a chance to get outside of the home to start their businesses and grow them to the next level.
In addition to Permit Arlington, Arlington does have an incentive program. We call them Gazelle Grants, which are looking at small startup companies who are going to occupy office space and hopefully grow into larger and larger companies in Arlington. And we've also doubled the capacity of our small business division within Arlington Economic Development to serve not only prospective new small businesses, but existing ones. We very much are looking to see that small businesses are a fabric of Arlington's growth. But this is not an either-or proposition.
Thank you.
You gotta do both.
You got it.
You gotta do both. So I'm Mark Riley. I'm the honorary mayor of the city of Ballston. And Ballston needs a little bit of de-densifying. We have a lot of pressure in that place. It would be nice to see if we get a little bit of pressure out of there after Harris Teeter and its 732 units. and the Mazda place and the one next to it, blah, 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 there's room to de-densify. And then secondly, let's keep those
Thank you.
beautiful trees at Reed School, and let's increase the Affordable Housing Investment Fund. Thanks. No questions.
Yeah.
Make this quick, I hear you.
Okay, yes, sir. Go ahead. There was no question.
No question.
Okay. Oh, it would be really good to have a question.
Jim Robinson, why did Alexandria fund education, affordable housing, and green, and not increase their tax rate, and you raised it 2 cents? Now, I may not be a tree, but I'm mature, and the only green problem that I have is my taxes went up significantly more than my Social Security, and I haven't heard anyone address that plan. But why did we go up 2 cents when the other jurisdictions did
Thank you.
not?
Now, see, that's a good question.
Question.
I was on fiscal affairs.
It is a tremendous question. You know, different jurisdictions have different finances from year to year. So a couple of years ago, Alexandria raised their taxes significantly. We did not. So in different years, different concerns are at their fiscal or on their agenda, and they have to deal with them. So last year was a confluence of dramatically lower revenues. Fortunately, they weren't as low as we were projecting them at first.
Thank
We
you.
then also had many schools opening at the same time.
Well, I think one good place to start looking would be at the school budgets. The schools got over $1 billion. I mean, maybe they could have been a little more frugal, a little more practical.
Well, I certainly agree. The two principal drivers of Arlington's budgets are is APS and Metro. And I do not believe that the current county board exercises sufficient oversight over either. Metro, I know, came to the county this year asking for a 22% increase over last year, which was which is totally outrageous, considering that the regional governments had already agreed to fund Metro increases at the rate of about 3% per year, and they wanted 22%. And I'm not.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our increases to Metro go up 3% a year. That's per agreement regionally, 3%, not 22. I would say at a high level, to briefly build on what Christian shared, very much agree with you. I think the biggest reason that we've seen an increased demand on residential or increased burden on residential taxpayers is because of that softness in our commercial market. Very slow growth because of the high vacancy, as high as 1 in 5 buildings in some submarkets like Crystal City. Part of the reason we've been working so intensely to try to bring in new office tenants so that you can get those good services that you and others in the CivEd well advocate for, but have that balance between commercial and residential.
Next question.
Linda Dye, Douglas Park. I'm a 44-year resident of Columbia Pike. Welcome to Douglas Park, Katie, and congratulations. Columbia Pike and Amazon. Columbia Pike has businesses and storefronts. Columbia Pike has businesses that are thriving in people's homes, and those folks don't need storefronts on Columbia Pike or anywhere else. They don't want them or don't need them. What will you all do to encourage Amazon to obtain goods and services of all kinds from local businesses, especially the Columbia Pike businesses? And also, what about encouraging Amazon to locally bank? We do have some independent small banks still, and regional banks, that are not part of national chains. We also have local community credit unions.
Thank
so
you.
what will you do about local banking? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hyde. That's going to be a little tough in 30 seconds. Let me try to at least pick up the retail piece. My neighbor on Columbia Pike, one of the best ways we can get Amazonians to come take their lunches or shop on Columbia Pike is by improving the transportation. And that's been a real focus for the premium transit network on the Pike. Definitely subject for more than 30 seconds. We can have a longer conversation later. But providing that connectivity from Pentagon City, and Crystal City up through the Pike, ease of access. Another big piece that we're working on is a retail study of the Pike to be able to spur and incentivize new retail establishments to locate. You can see your friendly CPRO executive director, Kim, if she's still here, or talk to one of us after. We'd love to tell you more about what's going on in retail.
Thank you.
Well, I think County Board has a tall order if it's going to persuade Amazon to do anything that is of benefit to the community. They have a horrible reputation. Not only do they contract out their labor with no benefits, but they also have a ruthless management ethic, which they will put in place at the new headquarters. And I suggest that you Google up some of the stories that have been published on the internet about how Amazon treats its employees and how it educates and indoctrinates its management. In addition to which, of course, they have paid no federal tax for the last 2 years.
Thank you.
I agree. It's going to be hard to get Amazon to do anything for the counties. The individuals that work for Amazon are a different story. Those are the people that we should target. If you're not getting the people to leave the offices, then you've got a real problem. So Amazon's already talked about not doing as much in the office, and I think we should try to encourage the employees to get out and see the rest of the county more.
Thank you.
Well said by Mr. Odell. To address Ms. Dye, I think in addition to transit, and just to let you know about transit, we've already got connections that take you from Columbia Pike, one-seat ride to Pentagon City. We do have planned for an extension of the premium transit network, a one-seat ride all the way from the west end of the Pike through Pentagon City and through Crystal City to actually access all locations that Amazon workers may work in. And little known is that the incentive package that we approve for Amazon requires that that money be spent in outfitting their local facilities by working with local contractors and businesses.
Thank you.
So at the very least, that money is spent locally.
Good evening. I'm George Keating, Waverly Hills. The July 8th storm called attention to our aging stormwater infrastructure system in Waverly Hills. That's not news. We've been hit over the last 20 years. And I know that the county is moving forward on addressing this issue, and I appreciate it. And I appreciate your visit, Mr. Dorsey, on July 12th, rather. This is a long-term fix. We should look at short-term fixes that could be added to our toolbox. Falls Church has long had a system.
Question.
Yes, Falls Church has long had a system where they allow property residents to deduct from their property taxes for approved improvements. Last year, we all voted for a constitutional amendment, which now allows towns, cities, and all importantly, counties to include this. So my question is, will you be advocating for a change in policy that will allow homeowners to deduct from their property taxes for approved improvements that they make to control stormwater? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Keating. And you know, this July 8th certainly impacted a lot of people in many devastating ways, and we have mobilized county government at all levels to figure out how to effectively assess what happened there and how it impacts our existing plans for stormwater management, but then also to figure out what are some new things that we can do to not only improve the county's investments, but also to better deal with the load that residents face when they bear the risk of this. So that is one of the things that we look at. I do want to note, though, that wouldn't be a change in policy. It wasn't possible until last year. So we're looking at how to implement it, along with a host of other things that you'll be hearing about September 24th.
Yeah, I think incentivizing residents and buildings to deal with stormwater and to deal with drainage so the county doesn't have to deal with every drop of water that falls on the ground is an excellent idea. I think that we should look at as many different options to keep water in the county and in the ground, and not let it just all go down into the Potomac.
Thank you. I think the best way to mitigate and prevent floods is to preserve mature tree canopy. So one of the things that I would do if elected to county board is lobby the Virginia state legislature to add a provision to Virginia's water improvement program to incentivize developers to preserve mature trees rather than simply those that are built, that are constructed new, which is currently the law. In other words, now they can get some kind of subsidy, deduction, credit, whatever, for planting new trees. There is no incentive for preserving mature trees. So I would lobby for that, in addition to which I would follow the advice of Peter Rusolo, who has several recommendations on flood control mitigation.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So great question, Mr. Keating, and this is something our staff has been studying since that law passed in the General Assembly and are urging. And I think that there are going to need to be some provisions that we put around it to make sure that those homeowner projects do in fact improve the overall, often watershed level is where we see these problems. And so we want to make sure if we are going to subsidize that through tax breaks that they are in service of that broader improvement. So much more to be said on this topic. I just want to share one thing for framing, which is, Arlington, small county, we still have over 400 miles of stormwater pipe throughout the county, and nearly all of it has been serviced within the last 12 years. The challenge that we're facing is that system is designed for a 10-year flood. The one we experienced on the 8th was, I've heard some estimates that it's more than a 100-year. As climate change is causing more unpredictable weather, we are faced with some real questions and some big infrastructure investments ahead to make sure that we can keep up with the impacts and the floodwater impacts of a warming planet. Exactly as Mr. Keating mentioned, those are long-term. You asked a great short-term question, and I can tell you it's something that in theory I support, and I think we need to nail the details.
Okay, thank you. These will be the last three, and then we'll have the candidates make their closing argument.
Thank you. Michael Bruce, Waycroft Woodlawn Civic Association. Glad to hear about.
Turn it on.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike Bruce, Waycroft Woodlawn Civic Association. Glad to hear your comment about investments. We've had a lot of talk here about different things, different constituencies are interested in. Since this is kind of close to a wrap up, each of our candidates. Top 3 things you would like to add more funding to in the county budget, and 3 things you would take funding away from in order to pay for those things.
Thank you.
Okay. Investments in affordable housing remain a top priority. As we've discussed earlier, there's some things, especially middle-income housing, we can seek to solve through land use, but for others, we will need to keep investing, and that's particularly true for providing housing for our low-income neighbors. Human services remains incredibly important to me. It's one of the things that attracted me to working in Arlington, to living in Arlington, was the way that we have invested in a safety net for our most vulnerable. I'm really proud of progress we've been able to make in the past few years, particularly when it comes to services for survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. But whether it's mental health or other issues facing our neighbors who need that safety net, it's an area I believe we need to continue to invest. And of course, our schools. They are the basis of Arlington's long-term success, and we have a growing student population. It doesn't mean that we can't be savvy about how those investments are made and make sure that we are being cost-effective, but they will need continued investment to retain their success. Thank you. Areas to cut, just very briefly, very proud of the fact that we've pushed hard to reduce the size of capital projects here in the county. For example, we've helped mitigate, help reduce the size of the Long Bridge Aquatic Center by more than 1/3, so 37%. We created reduced transit stations on the Pike, reduced those project budgets by about 1/5, 18%, and I will continue to try to find ways that we can value engineer our capital projects. You're gonna have to give me a minute to think about the other 2, and I'll try to come back to it in closing remarks.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I think one of my top priorities is the streets. Even though there has been substantial investment in street repaving this year, the pavement is of poor quality in many sections and on primary roads like Clarendon Boulevard in Clarendon. To finance this, I would take money away from the $1.65 million, which has been allocated for just 4 bus stops on Columbia Pike. I patronize those bus stops. I patronize the 16 bus, but we don't need to be spending $400,000 per bus stop to fund improved public transit. Another thing I would fund is the libraries. I'm a big fan of Arlington libraries. A number of them are still not open every day of the week, and I would reprogram monies possibly from that are currently going to, for example, we hired 5 new planners this year. One of them's a dedicated Amazon planner. Do we really need to spend $1 million on 5? I'd rather have that money go to the libraries. And thank you.
So that's a really good question. Yeah, cutting the bus stops price in half would be a great idea. That would be doubling the number of bus stops while cutting the price. I mean, a structure for a bus stop only costs like $10,000. I'd like to see, instead of maybe cutting stuff, how about if we find ways to have things make some money? Libraries, like you said, have huge amounts of open space in Arlington. The Central Library is vast, and there's plenty of room for a cafe or something there that could help generate income to help support itself, as well as having maybe more events at parks and more open events where we could raise revenue there. I think those things could be beneficial.
Thank you.
I think we need to plus up our funding for the suite of policies that address climate change. I think we need to focus on maintaining our infrastructure. These are things that we've already paid for. Allowing them to fall into disrepair is not a good use of tax dollars, so making sure we prioritize maintaining them in a state of good repair. Those are my top 2 priorities. I'm not going to give you 3. How I pay for it is with the overall approach that I've taken to county government since I've been on the board, is finding ways to deliver services better. I don't view public policy as a binary. In order to pay for what we need, I have to take away from something else that we need. I figure out how to prioritize what works well and to deliver it efficiently in a way that is affordable for the whole community.
Thank you. John?
My name is Sean Shoon, Buckingham Community Civic Association. To increase representation and opportunities for service on a county board, would you increase the number of county board seats to 7 or 9? And would you make any of those seats representative by district versus at large?
So I'm not convinced that that solves any problems that we currently have, increasing the number of people on the board. I think one of the benefits that I've gleaned from working regionally with colleagues on other councils and boards that range from, of course, we're the smallest at 5, but to as high as 13, is that you don't necessarily get better government, better representation, or the ability for there to be equity through public service. So I am not in favor of that generally, unless I can see a compelling proposition that shows me how it would address any issues that we have. And at this point, I haven't seen it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think that's necessarily a wise choice. The more people you add to the board, the more money it's going to cost to run it, the more disagreements you'll have, the more infighting and arguments that are going to come from that. I don't necessarily think that the board should be made up of one party, but I think having a number of around 5 is a decent number. It's not necessarily the perfect, but it's good.
Well, I certainly don't, for the same reasons that my peers have spoken. I do not support increasing the size of the board. We've got enough trouble as it is. However, I do support district representation because I believe that under the current system, this at-large system, neighborhood concerns are invariably submerged in the larger debate. about what is going to happen to a particular neighborhood parcel. What I'm thinking of, for example, is a development that I might otherwise have supported for new APA residents near the intersection of Washington Boulevard and just right across the street from the Giant. I guess that's near Monroe. And Kirkwood, that's right, Washington Boulevard in Kirkwood, where the neighborhood residents simply wanted one or two small concessions, and they were denied all of them because APA, having the prestige that it has and the high visibility, was considered more important, and it decided that it didn't need to negotiate with the neighborhood. If there was a district representative there, if there was a Ballston or Greater Virginia Square representative, that person could have spoken much better or advocated for the neighborhood concerns.
Thank you.
I actually might be she's standing alone on this. I am intrigued by the idea of potentially having more board members. It's something I've talked recently about with our former colleague, Mr. Weistat. I think there could be a potential opportunity for the board to do more of its work in subcommittees, which could be a better way for us to truly delve into issues and have better coverage of those issues, more responsiveness to individual community concerns, for example. I have not made that a stake of my primary tenet of my reelection campaign. It's a big structural question, and I think we have a lot of pressing problems ahead of us and that need more devoted attention. However, I remain interested in it and would be interested actually in hearing from those of you who lead your neighborhoods and communities about the number of board members. I don't support the idea of districts, however. I think the fact that we are all at large, we all represent everyone, and we all have an equal interest in every area of the county leads to much more collaborative efforts as opposed to simply saying X is happening in your corner of the county, 4 people or more are going to pay less attention and give deference to the person who represents that area. I like that you get 5 minds applied to every issue, no matter where it's happening in Arlington.
Thank you. Last question.
Nicole Merlin. So recycling has been an issue nationally, and I know that we just eliminated our glass recycling system, and I applaud you for putting in that purple bin at Quincy Park. But what are your long-term plans for recycling going forward, or what would your plans be?
It's a great question. Glass recycling, as some of you all know, essentially the aftermarket for glass has collapsed. That means that the waste management companies that process our single stream recycling cannot resell it, which means they have been dumping it in landfills. So we tried to make the honest conversation, or have the honest conversation, and suggest to folks that they should probably put their glass in the black bin because it was going to landfill anyway through single stream recycling. We could not find a contractor willing to separate it out because, again, they didn't have the market for it. We have encouraged folks to please use the purple bins. I just dropped off some bottles myself, I promise. It's a pleasure to use over at Quincy Park or the Trade Center. Long term, I'd like to see Arlington moving towards more education partnership with organizations like Eco Action Arlington to reduce the amount of single-use containers overall, be they plastic, glass, etc. Sometimes I think we can think that because we've tossed a bottle in the recycling bin, we've done our part for the environment. Still, we experience the same emissions and energy produced to actually required to actually produce that single-use container. So I think it's much more important to try to do the education and the outreach to reduce the amount of products that we use, rather than in maintaining our focus to the extent we can on the single stream. But really, the first 2 R's: the reduce, the reuse, while we continue to move forward on recycling.
Well, I understand the market reasons why glass is no longer recycled in the county. Right now, we have only 2 places where residents can truck their glass, and that is at Quincy Park and at the Trade Center, and that's not adequate. If indeed we cannot afford to hire a contractor to pick our recycled glass up at the curb, then we need to provide more recycling facilities for residents to conveniently truck their glass. And I also want to point out that there is a market for it in the sense that Fairfax County does have a facility for crushing that glass and evidently manufacturing sand out of it. And so there is a modest market. It's not true that there's no market at all. There is a market. We just need to make it more convenient for residents to recycle that glass locally.
Yeah, single-use containers are absolutely the bane of society. I mean, we should get rid of them as whenever possible. We should go back to reusing, sterilizing deposits. Those type of programs worked. They kept the environment cleaner. They were effective for a long time, and they've been stopped because it was cheaper and easier for companies to simply just have you throw away a bottle or a package. If the county was to encourage the citizens to promote that type of stuff, that would be fantastic.
So I want to be clear, we don't want people to throw away glass, we do want people to use the drop-off centers, because it is in fact recycled and repurposed in Fairfax. It should be more convenient, but at the same time, you know, I remember a time when you didn't have the convenience of recycling everything in one. You had to separate, you had to clean out things. And I think in many ways we've gotten accustomed to the ease at which it has become, but that has come at great consequence. We used to have that ease taken care of by other people on the back end who would sort it out, clean it, ship it to China, who would accept it as dirty and just deal with it. Those times have changed. We have to mature our approach to sustainability by maybe putting in a little bit more effort until we find ways to make it a little bit more convenient yet again, and at the same time adopt a zero waste approach that includes not just glass and other traditional recyclables, but also food waste and other areas where our county has not yet met the standards that I have for where we need to be.
Mr. Dorsey, do you want to make a closing remark?
Thank you, and I will be brief. I assume you want these to be very short. I appreciate this. This is really one of the best parts about the job, is having an opportunity to come and discuss issues, to hear what's on your mind, and to have some of my assumptions and thoughts tested, and to think again about how to provide better service to you all. This is thrilling to have the chance to stand before you, reflecting on the past 4 years, and as I reflect, I'm proud, but as I said at the beginning, I'm not satisfied. There's so much more that I want to do in order to help this community be the community that it can be. And I think these questions tonight illustrate that there's a lot of work to be done, but we're starting with a great foundation. And one of the things that I would ask you to do as we go through the next couple of months and having us appear at various forums and festivals and talking about our candidacies is for you to actually do what you've done tonight. Test our assumptions, test our assertions. That's a responsibility that I, and I think Ms. Crystal, as incumbents, we owe you. We owe you to test the assumptions and the performance that we have given to you over the last few years. To our challengers, I think you also have to test them to make sure that they are not just delivering, cute slogans, but are actually delivering truths and not falsehoods and outright distortions. You actually have to test all of us to see that we are standing before you capable of serving you in the way in which you deserve. And that is befitting a community like Arlington, which I think has been great and can be even greater. And I thank you all for listening and for your attention tonight. And I hope to have your support on November 5th or with early voting before. I do have campaign literature on the outside. I encourage you to take one or a few for your friends, and I look forward to seeing you on the campaign trail. Thank you.
It's hard following you. I'd like to say thank you all for taking the time to listen to me tonight. This is the first time I've spoken to a group like this about this, and it's given me a lot to think about. There are some questions I saw coming and some I didn't expect, and hopefully I'll come away from this better. And I hope to encourage you to think about voting for an independent, even if it's not me, just to get a different voice on the county board. Having 5 people that are all aligned in one direction doesn't necessarily create the best end result in every situation. And I think we should think about that as we move forward. Thank you.
Are you tired of my opponent's doublespeak on everything from recycling to runoff? Tired of weasel words and empty promises? Are you weary of more taxes, escalating rent, gridlocked streets, and overcrowded classrooms? Does it bother you that Katie and Christian approved an agreement to build a boathouse on the Potomac and a runoff-inducing support facility at Key Bridge while reneging on earlier promises for a comprehensive public planning process? As an independent candidate for Arlington County Board, I'm beholden to no corporation, no party, no AstroTurf groups. I can leverage valuable institutional knowledge gained through years of civic activism and volunteer work to serve you, the voters, not special interests. I won't claim credit for rubber stamping done deals like Amazon. I won't ignore the costs of high-density development like inflated land values, real estate assessment hikes, crowded schools, congested roads, flooded streets, strained services, failing infrastructure, clear-cut lots, and heat-trapping hardscape. According to a recent real estate report, Arlington's housing prices are expected to go up 17.2% this year, which means that double-digit assessment hikes are on the way. You don't have to be a math major to calculate the Amazon deal's net impact on your tax bill. You don't need a PhD in planning to see that Arlington's planning process is broken. I promise to work hard for you, to provide honest leadership, and put the public interest ahead of special interests. Help me to help you by spreading the word about my candidacy, volunteering your time or talents, donating to my campaign, voting for me on November 5th. Together we can make Arlington a better place for all who live and work here.
Michael Bruce. Economic development incentives, I want us to do fewer of those and save money there, and cut energy costs, which I think our community energy plan update that we're considering later this month will enable us to do. Those are the two remaining things I'd like to resize or right size or shrink in the budget. Thank you all. I think the diversity of questions tonight and the importance of the issues that you've raised, from flooding, our environment, trees, our budget, our schools, housing, and the nuance of these questions really reflects and exemplifies the thought leadership that CivFed plays and offers to this county. We don't always agree, but your fingerprints as the Civic Federation and as leaders of your civic association are all over our public policies. You innovate, you dig into the details, and you push us on the board, as well as pushing county staff when you see areas to improve. This county is truly better for it. And I think that the conversation we've had tonight really does illustrate it. It's been a pleasure to get to work with you all over the past few years. I hope I'll have the chance to continue to do it. I mentioned my website, www.katiecrystal.com. If you go there, click on issues, you can see extensive details on everything like how I'm thinking about the impacts of Amazon, to my position on environmentalism, climate change, as well as housing, human services, women's issues, and other things important to me. I'd love to talk more with you. If you're interested in learning more, you can also contact us through the website. We have campaign literature outside. If I have persuaded you, we'd love it if you take a yard sign and tell your neighbors about what you've heard tonight. Thank you again for this opportunity and for the role that you have played in making Arlington a better place.
Thank you to all the candidates. If I can have Mr. Purvis come up, and we'll do the next panel. But I have to say that I had bad manners here. I want to thank Arlington Independent Media for filming this tonight. I also want to, you can have a seat. I also want to mention that we are losing our treasurer, Sarah Shorthall. She's resigned. And we will miss her, but she still is a delegate, so we're still going to have her. That brings us to the point that we need to elect a treasurer. But I'm just going to give a little token to Sarah before we do that. Do I have any nominations? Nominations, yes, Dennis.
I'd like to nominate Gordon Boswick to replace Sarah as treasurer. Gordon has a great lot of experience, 15 years with the Arlington County Civic Federation, Revenue and Expenses Committee. He's a treasurer or a secretary.
15 years Old League Civic Association, okay, excuse me, and 10 years as treasurer of alumni nonprofit, and 10 years and president and treasurer of Friends of Gulf Branch Nature Center. Great guy for the job. I'd like to make by acclamation as possible.
We have a second. Open the floor. Any other nominations from the floor? Then we thank you, Bert. Yay. Tonight, Janet Howe cannot be with us, and this is something that she sent as an email. Whoever thought a shattered ankle could be a good thing, but mine probably saved my life. Here's the story. On the last evening of our High Peaks Adirondack vacation, I fell in rocks and obviously crushed my ankle. We were on an island, so my husband Hent and son Brian performed an amazing rescue. They carried me off the rocks, down 18 steps to the dock, into a boat, across the lake, onto another dock, and into the car. We ended up at one of the rural hospitals we are trying hard to preserve here in Virginia and across the country. Orthopedists operate and gave a great prognosis. The only restriction was no weight on the ankle. Routine blood tests showed I had suffered a heart attack. It was a so-called silent attack. I had no symptoms, no pain, no shooting sensation, no crushing chest pain, nothing. Apparently, this is fairly common in women. A 3-hour ambulance ride took me to a modern Catholic hospital in Albany. They performed a cardiac catheterization, which revealed extensive blockages, so I needed bypass surgery. I was close to Archie Bunker's big one. The 8-hour quadruple bypass was a total success and nowhere near as scary as it used to be. While the ankle break probably saved my life, it also kept me from walking, so I will probably be a tad slower recovering than most. Never was I so grateful for a shattered ankle. So that would be the opening statement for Janet Howe for the 32nd District. Mr. Purvis, would you like to go ahead and make an opening statement?
And I have 2 minutes.
Oh,
Am I still under the time constraints?
no, not for the opening.
Thank you. Actually, anyway, so I'm Arthur Purvis. I'm a Republican. How long has it been since you've seen a Republican?
Long time. Long time. Mic closer so I can hear you.
How's this?
Perfect.
Thank you. Republican candidate for the 32nd District. I'd like to thank the Arlington County Civic Federation for holding this and inviting me and for accommodating some sudden changes in my schedule. I'd like to defer the issues for a moment. I'm feeling a little melancholy. My opponent is recovering from a crushed ankle and heart bypass surgery, and this morning I buried my wife. So I'd like instead to talk about some similarities between me and my opponent. The first being that this is the 8th race for both of us, with the slight difference that she's won all 7 of her previous races, and I've lost all 7 of my previous races. But I will say that of my 8 races, and 5 of them, if I had not run, the Democrat would not have had a Republican opponent. And I think it's important to keep the debate going. And the second thing is I hope I've established a reputation for respecting my opponents. Next similarity Senator Howell and I have is we both went to the University of Pennsylvania. The third similarity is our interest in the Adirondacks. I actually buried my wife in the Adirondacks this morning in a family cemetery with her beloved cousins that we visited when we were courting, with beloved aunts, with her grandparents, her great-grandparents. So it was, and I got a plot for me too, right next door. So it looks like my opponent and I share a love of the Adirondacks. And the next thing we have in common is heart attacks. Both my wife and Senator Howell had heart attacks. Both of them were catheterized. Both of them had blockages that could not be repaired by stents. My wife would not have survived a bypass surgery. That's out of the question. So they tried a stent procedure, which stent procedure was a success, except she didn't survive afterwards. But they got all the blockages out and the stents in. And I need to say that the last week or so has been an absolutely beautiful time of memories and love and friends and children and grandchildren. It's of course, you know, I could break up any moment, but it's just been, we were married for 46 years. We celebrated our 46th wedding anniversary. I take it you're applauding her, not me. Okay, thank you. We celebrated our 46th wedding anniversary 3 days before she died in the hospital. So anyway, I'll mention one other thing. The General Assembly Legislative Information System does a really good job visualizing the state budget. And one of the things they do, which I really hadn't looked at before, is they display all the reports of the Senate Finance Committee. And I just glanced at the reports. There's a volume of material. But, you know, it struck me that the senators have to make these decisions, and if you go to public hearings and you see people plead for government aid in so many different ways, it's really got to be stressful making these budget decisions. And I don't know if that stress combined with the constant trips down to Richmond and you know, contributed to her heart attack, but that may be. And I think whether you agree or disagree with you know, elected politicians, and I disagree with most of them, and I have lots of disagreements with Senator Howell. I don't know if anybody's going to ask a question. I hope somebody will ask a question or two. But we have to think, our elected officials, we really need to give them credit for, whether you agree or disagree with them, for the time they put in. One example is, as I've testified for years at public hearings, but I come for my time slot and leave. They have to sit there for the whole hearing, and I really admire them for that. So I'll conclude my introductory statement by saying that I pray for my opponent's complete and speedy recovery.
I want to thank you.
Well, and I will say that I did go to one of her town halls, and one of the things that she asked for was bipartisan collegiality. She talked about having that in some of her earlier races. So this is my effort to extend that.
I want to thank you for the effort you made today to get here and align the airline up and everything else.
My wife made the airplane arrive 30 minutes early.
Any questions, please? Do you have any question?
Mike Cantwell, Yorktown Civic Association. Thank you very much for your courage to come here today, and thank you for your courage of throwing your hat in the ring so many times. It's really important. So speaking of just democracy in general, if you could talk a little bit about your feelings on the state of our democracy right now, especially at the state level, and then if you could give your position on ranked choice voting and gerrymandering.
And what?
Gerrymandering.
John Adams said there never yet was a democracy that did not commit suicide. John Adams, at the time of the Constitutional Convention, wrote a 3-volume treatise called In Defense of American Constitutions. Do I get more in a minute?
Oh, yes, of course.
Because this takes more than a minute, okay? And all the colonies, after the Declaration of Independence, wrote their own constitutions. And all but 2 had bicameral legislatures, and 2 did not. I think Pennsylvania and Georgia did not. And there was a Frenchman who said that it was ridiculous to have a bicameral legislature. So John Adams wrote a 3-volume treatise on the necessity of a bicameral legislature, a House and a Senate. The Founding Fathers were afraid of democracy. They knew that the line between democracy and demagoguery is very thin, that democracy can easily become demagoguery, and so they did not create a democracy. They created a republic. Now the question is, what is the difference between a democracy and a republic? And I've only heard one person give the answer that John Adams would have given. The difference between a republic and a democracy is an appointed Senate. When our Constitution was written, senators were appointed by state legislatures. And the purpose for that was that the Founding Fathers knew that the House of Representatives, those candidates would win through a lot of demagoguery. So he wanted to have another body where the members of that body did not demagogue to get elected. And then they threw in an extra bonus by having these senators appointed by state legislators. That gave the states a powerful check over the growth of the federal government. Well, that was destroyed in 1913 by the 17th Amendment when senators were popularly elected. We now have 2 houses of demagoguery. We have a $23 trillion debt. We have government that spends, 25% of its money on defense, which the Founding Fathers felt should be, 80% of what the government did, and spends half to 3/4 on transferring wealth. So we basically are a democracy now. Okay, we have a few vestiges of a republic in the Electoral College and in the Senate, which has equal representation for all states. But my view on democracy is we are fulfilling John Adams' prophecy and we are committing suicide. We are basically a democracy.
Thank you. Next question.
Ranked choice voting.
Ranked voting, I've heard it discussed and I forget what it is. So we can either skip that or you can explain it to me.
Fairvote.org. Everybody should Google it.
Okay. And then what was
Gerrymandering.
I don't believe it is possible to come up with a system that will honestly do congressional district or any districts by geographic area. Gerrymandering is wrong. I've been told that the district I'm running in, which is very liberal, was gerrymandered by Senator Howe. I know there's proposals to end gerrymandering, to appoint councils and so forth. It's supposedly bipartisan, but I just don't see how politics can be left out of the selection of those committees. It's a horrible thing. It makes the country far more, we have more extremist divides because of it. If there is a solution, I'd love to support it.
Next question.
Don Gurney, Legal Women Voters. Following up on the gerrymandering thing, there was legislation passed last year for a proposed constitutional amendment for a Virginia redistricting commission. What's your position on repassing this in the next session of the legislature? And what's your position on supporting a proposed equal rights amendment?
Well, I'm not familiar with the specifics of that bill. If there was some evidence that it would work, I would support it. Okay? The Equal Rights Amendment? Okay. The Equal Rights Amendment is a gift to trial lawyers. Any personnel decision made by any large business or small could be hauled into court, and the employer would have to prove that his decisions were not motivated by gender differences. We already have laws in terms of pay to mandating equal pay for equal work, and certainly at the federal level. And I saw that. But how do you enforce that? How do you prove that 2 people, even in the same position, are doing equal work? And so one of the things I saw was that employers were forced to provide to the government, the amount of salaries they were paying to men and women for different, for equivalent jobs. So that verifies that there's not equal pay. But that doesn't address anything about the equal work. And in fact, so I was a computer programmer for 40 years. Mercifully, out of those 40 years, only 1 year was I responsible for salaries and the way it worked. is we at the low level proposed raises for each of the employees in our group, and then it went to higher management. We had a young white male from Duke University whose salary should have been doubled. He was doing the work with he was brilliant. He was doing work with 3 people. I spent hours trying to get a raise for him from Human Resources, and basically they gave him a little raise, but we lost him. He left. Meanwhile, we had a woman who was doing okay work, but not exceptional work. And when hers, raise came back from the corporation, she got a big raise. So the equal, I don't know if you can legislate equal pay for equal work. I think this is going to be an issue for forever and ever. And I'm also concerned in the Equal Rights Amendment that somebody's going to bring up a lawsuit saying that sex-separate bathrooms are not constitutional. I've read all the rebuttals of that, all the complex reasons why no judge would ever agree to that. But how do you know that there's not some judge somewhere who will agree to that? The Equal Rights Amendment is an unguided missile.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Last question.
Oh, somebody asked me why I'm running.
As you,
I always have problems. Bernie Byrne, I'm Buckingham Civic Association. I did you forget to stop? Oh, this is the second time. Try it again. Technology. As you know, one of the big divisions in the state legislature.
A question.
Okay. The question is, the Republican basically and Democrat have a big difference in the state legislature over pro-life and pro-choice. Which side you're Republican? However, your district is very liberal. How do you stand?
Thank you. Thank you. I was hoping that question would come up.
Thanks.
So last month, my wife was able to go to Beach Week. And if you go to my Facebook page /Purvis A, you'll see a photograph of my wife surrounded by 1 son-in-law and 7 grandchildren. And they're all smiling. They loved her. When we figured that she was able to go to Beach Week, she was so excited. She's, when people asked her if she's going to Beach Week, she said, "Yes, I'm going. We're going to have so much fun." And that's how she said it. And the reason she had so much fun was because of her children and her grandchildren. How did we get to the point where candidates thought that they could win votes by snuffing out the lives of children? We're supposed to love them. In fact, we have 2 adopted granddaughters who were candidates for abortion. Their mother was on drugs. My son-in-law says they're lucky they weren't aborted. They're just adorable little girls. Another thing, probably the biggest crisis facing this nation, and nobody talks about it, it's talked about a little bit, is the aging population. We don't have enough young people to take care of the aging society. We need more children. So obviously I'm pro-life, but I have the candidates get lots of questionnaires, okay? And I've got many, pro-life and they call it pro-choice. Let me digress for a minute here on pro. My opponent calls abortion reproductive rights. Abortion is the opposite of reproduction. We have friends who have 6 children. The mother has been harassed for having 6 children. She's the one whose reproductive rights are being threatened. They call abortion pro-choice. Well, there's 2 people involved. What choice did the child have? None. They say it has to do with the control of a woman's body. There's been 60 million abortions since Roe versus Wade. 30 million of them would have been women. What control did they have over their bodies?
Thank you. Mr. Purvis, if you'd like to make a closing statement, please.
The reason I am running is to end racial inequality in Virginia public schools by bringing back phonics-based reading instruction instead of whole word, bringing back arithmetic drill, bringing back history instead of social studies, and bringing back the Lord's Prayer and the 10 Commandments, instead of tax hikes, busing, redistricting, boundary changes, and police. You can see the racial inequality, for example, in the high school SAT scores, where Asians score dramatically higher than whites, who score dramatically higher than Hispanics, who score dramatically higher than African Americans. You see the same trend in the 4th grade reading and math tests. In other words, our public schools are not successfully teaching reading and arithmetic basics before 4th grade. And those low-income children who are not successfully taught, their lives are ruined by 4th grade. And I lay the blame at the progressive education curriculum that was introduced a century ago by John Dewey and his colleagues at the Columbia Teachers College. He was the one who, and I lived this in DC public schools, where they threw out phonics-based reading instruction and replaced it with whole word, which is not teaching reading at all. It's just expecting children to memorize words. The children who succeed are the ones whose parents either can teach them phonics at home or parents send them to supplemental programs afterwards. Before the Civil War, it was illegal to teach a slave to read for fear that they could become independent. Well, that rule still holds today. If you cannot read, you cannot be independent, but today you're a slave to the government instead of to a plantation. I'd say most of the racial inequality we have in this country today is due to John Dewey and his progressive education curriculum, which basically teaches nothing in the first 3 grades and condemns low-income children to intergenerational poverty. And it can be fixed. My opponent has neglected that. I have it on my card. Article 8 of the Virginia Constitution says that the General Assembly will ensure an educational program of high quality. My opponent has ignored that issue for 28 years. All she's done is want to funnel more and more money into this education system, which sets up racial inequality that victimizes low-income blacks and Hispanics. It can be fixed, and I want to be a voice to fix it.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for making it here, and I want to thank Senator Howell's staff for coming tonight, too. Thank you. Hey, well, Delegate Lopez and Mr. Moglen come down. I neglected to actually take a vote on the 2 new associations that we have, and I would like to do that. All in favor of Columbia Pike Revitalization Organization and Spout Run Terrace Condominium for membership?
Say aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Thank you, guys. I'm sorry it went long. Here we go. Here, here's yours. Very good. I apologize for getting long. We got a little bit of a late start. Let's see. Okay, all right. Mr. Lopez, if you would like to go first with an opening statement.
Sure.
Did you push 2 minutes?
2 minutes.
Did you push the? There we go.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here this evening. I want to thank our host, the Arlington Civic Federation, for organizing this debate. I believe in a commonwealth that lifts everyone up and leaves no one behind. As your delegate, I've been a champion for our values in Richmond. I'm proud of the work I've done and the relationships I've developed to find common ground and get things accomplished. For the last 8 years, I've been the patron, co-patron, or chief co-patron of 115 bills signed into law. 49 of those were bipartisan. I'm proud of the legislation I passed addressing everything from small business procurement, to tenant protections, to criminal justice reform, to expanding temporary assistance for needy families, to cybersecurity protections for our military and passport holders, to incentivizing solar and renewable energy, and protecting immigrants from fraud. I'm especially proud of my legislation that created the Virginia Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which has already helped provide housing to hundreds of families just in the 49th district.
and working as a part of our House Democratic leadership team, I'm honored to have, among other things, increased teacher salaries by 5%, secured a dedicated source of revenue for Metro, worked to close the school-to-prison pipeline, expanded no-excuse absentee voting, and perhaps most importantly, I'm proud to have expanded Medicaid and healthcare protections for 400,000 working Virginians, including 5,600 of our neighbors and friends in the 49th District. Going forward, we must focus on jobs and the economy, education, and the needs of working families. I pledge to continue fighting for better schools, long-term transportation solutions, environmental safeguards, new jobs and economic development, and the Virginia and Arlington values of embracing diversity, tolerance, and compassion that we all hold dear. I'm humbled by the support and endorsements of everyone from U.S. Senators Mark Warner and Tim Kaine, former Governor Terry McAuliffe, to members of the Arlington School and County boards. And I'm also grateful for the endorsements of a wide range of organizations, from the firefighters to the labor community to the environmental community and the Virginia Education Association. They understand, as I do, that politics is about improving people's lives. As I hope I've shown you over the last 8 years, I will always work hard to make sure that Virginia is a place where we lift everyone up and leave no one behind. I look forward to the conversation this evening.
Thank you.
Good evening. I am Terry Modulin. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you tonight. And I appreciate the service and sacrifices you make as community leaders. I myself have been a member of and officer of the board of directors of our 825-unit condominium association in Seven Corners for the last 5 years, so I understand the work that you have. First and foremost, I am here tonight in defense of the voiceless human beings, the tiny ones I could hold in the palm of my hand in their mother's womb. We must not weaken the laws that are designed in our state for a mother to reflect upon the most serious decision of her life. And the Democrats tried to do that in this last General Assembly session. Human rights begin in the womb. Love the mothers, love the babies, make adoption more affordable, maternal assistance more available. To me, this is the crucial crucible moral issue in this election. So what of everyday issues, both state and local? I'm guided by two principles. What laws would work in this very diverse state, and what can society actually digest, but maybe with a little bit of a diet right now, realizing there are no final victories. First of all, the opioid epidemic. Public health enemy number one, deaths surpassing those from traffic crashes and homicides right now. State government and local government have simply not done enough to deal with this particular crisis. We did well with the drunk driving issue to drive that down years ago, coming from all sides. We should be able to do this with the opioid issue. Second, firearms. Let us begin now to put in place many of the proposed reforms and restrictions, but my plan would allow people who have weapons now, firearms now, to retain those, because it's simply a more practical means to approach the particular issue while placing restrictions on the use of those and the carriage, transportation of those firearms. Third, the minimum wage. I propose that we would raise the minimum wage here in Northern Virginia to $13 an hour right now, not delayed, but vary it across the state by the type of locality and the professional class. How do we keep a handle on the cost of living? Let's pay the workers who are working there the minimum wage, a higher minimum wage, transportation alternatives, affordable housing partnerships, zoning, so on. Environment, more trains, less traffic, more wind and solar power, safer routes.
Thank you. Thank you. If people would like to ask questions, please come to the mic. Please ask a question.
All right, I think it's working. The concept. We know that there are serious environmental issues facing the Commonwealth. Oh, Dave Gelman, Yorktown Civic Association. We know there are serious environmental concerns facing the Commonwealth. Things like energy efficiency, renewable energy, alternative fuels, mass transit, anything we can do to get people out of cars. These are all very important.
if you had to pick one thing to try in the legislature, if you were elected or reelected, what would you pick?
Thank you.
Who goes first?
You will go first.
It's an unfair question. There are 5 things I would do. All right, we need to do Reggie immediately yesterday. That'll address 30% of what we need to deal with carbon emissions. We need to actually incentivize, in a way we haven't, solar and wind energy in Virginia. We have to do more for energy efficiency. We're behind Maryland in terms of energy efficiency. Let me go further. We're behind North Carolina in terms of solar. We're behind West Virginia. Let me repeat, West Virginia in terms of wind energy. We are woefully behind. We should be the leader in the Mid-Atlantic when it comes to renewable energy. We're leaving tens of thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars on the table every year. The other 3 things I would address. We need to basically deal with APCO and Dominion in such a way where they're not dictating policy through the State Corporation Commission. As a part of that, the 4th thing we need to do is we need to make a 4th rule. The impact of the ratepayer regarding the State Corporation Commission is usually the most important thing, and that means that it's harder to build renewable energy. What we should be doing is actually, instead of making the 4th rule, the long-term stability of fuel prices. Right now it's around $190 to $140 for a short ton of Appalachian coal. So maybe, between 90 cents and $6 for a unit of natural gas. How much does the sun cost? 0. How much does the wind cost? 0. After you build the facility. So now that we're actually able to deal with solar in such a way that it makes economic sense to build the facility, we need to go further.
Thank you.
I have one more, and I'll get to that later.
Okay, it's 90 seconds just to remind you for your response. Okay, go ahead.
First priority is to shape our transportation alternatives so they are less oriented to fossil fuels. So that means more emphasis on trains, more safety for bicyclists, and doing everything else that we can to get people out of cars, particularly in this area. Dominion, deal with Dominion Energy. We need to change that or continue to pressure them so that there is more, they agree to more solar power over a longer period of time.
Michael Beard from Maywood, thank you both for your service to communities and running. What are your plans for getting corruption and big money out of Richmond?
I signed a pledge recently for a group called the Clean Money Squad, and that pledge involved, first of all, no revolving doors between members of the legislature, their staff, and lobbyists. Secondly, bans lobbyists from funding the campaigns of those whose committees they are affected, and it does a number of other things. So I think that things like gerrymandering or stopping gerrymandering is also an important part of getting corruption down in our system, our state system.
Thomas Jefferson talked about a people's legislature, and that's what we need to aspire to always. We want corruption and we want proper ethics laws. When I actually came into the House of Delegates, I had a frank conversation with some senior Republicans. And I said, you can drive a Mack truck through our ethics laws in Virginia. And I was told, and this is a quote, "We're gentlemen of Virginia. We don't need the laws of other states." And I started laughing at him, and he got upset. And so the fact is that we are in a very unique time. We are very close to taking the majority back, the first progressive majority in really the history of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so it's 2 votes in the House of Delegates. What does that mean? That means that when a Democratic majority comes in, you'll have a fairly robust conversation about limitations on donations, limitations on corporate giving. I'm already committed with another organization to put in legislation next year, similar to what Chap Peterson put in the Senate side, basically saying that folks in the General Assembly should not take or will not be allowed to take donations, and Dominion and APCO may not give donations if you're a regulated utility in Virginia. And so that is simply a baby step to where we all want to go.
Thank you. Next question.
Don Gurney from the League of Women Voters again. A repeat of the question I asked the Senate candidates. What's your position on these two major issues that will come before the General Assembly this year? The Virginia Redistricting Commission, which a proposed amendment was passed last year, and the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment.
With respect to the redistricting, in 2013 and now, I propose to support a commission that is made up partly of legislators and partly of appointed experts, if you will, to be able to fix this particular problem. With respect to the ERA, I am open to further discussion on this, but right now I would oppose it for three reasons. One, I agree with what candidate Purvis said. I think it's a gold mine for trial lawyers. Secondly, I think it would hurt family law. The predisposition right now in family law across this country and in Virginia is toward the mother because the mother, particularly with young children. So with their assumption that she's the better nurturer of young children, I think that it could hurt the position of women in that regard in family law. And third, with respect to the draft, as I read the very simple, I think it's 9 or 10 words of the ERA, there's no question in my mind that women would be equally subject to the draft. Now people say, well, the draft will never come back. Well, you never know what will happen. And I think we're not quite ready as a nation to do that. Why? Because we still need mothers as the prime nurturers in the home of children, even in wartime. I completely disagree with my opponent on both of those points. In terms of more study for the Equal Rights Amendments, the fact is I submitted this constitutional amendment 3 years ago, and I have fully supported and voted for moving forward on the Equal Rights Amendment in Virginia. The fact that women are not afforded the exact same rights as in the Constitution as men is an issue that needs to be addressed quickly. The fact is also that my earliest political memory in 1974 was my mom carrying me on her back at an Equal Rights Amendment rally in front of the White House. She was wearing a Women's Places in the House and the Senate t-shirt. And I put that legislation in to honor her at that time, and I will continue to support the Equal Rights Amendment because it is the right thing to do for all Americans, I believe. With regard to the Redistricting Commission Constitutional Amendment, I voted for it this year.
Thank you. Next question.
Mike Cantwell, Yorktown Civic Association. A 19-year-old in Virginia cannot purchase a beer, cannot rent a car, cannot do many, many other things, but he or she can purchase a rifle or a shotgun in Virginia. Would you commit here that you will submit legislation or sign on to legislation to raise the age to purchase a rifle or a shotgun to 21?
I will commit that I have in the past put in numerous pieces of legislation to right the wrong of the slow erosion of handgun and sensible gun violence prevention legislation in Virginia for the last 22 years. We used to have one handgun a month. That's been slowly eroded in my time on as the number 3 person on the Militia and Police Public Safety Committee. I have put in legislation to address the poorest ways we can get concealed carry. I would address the legislation to and put in legislation to basically say that we should limit the ability, we should make it a misdemeanor to give a firearm to a child under the age of 5. A child who is 4 and 3 is simply learning to name colors, parts, how to tell time. They do not have the responsibility inherent in using and working with a firearm. And so we have a significant number of things in terms of red flag laws, in terms of bump stocks, in terms of the poorest ways that we're able to purchase guns in this state. And the fact is, we need universal background checks. Can we all just agree that we need universal background checks in the Commonwealth of Virginia? I would also go further. I would actually say that we should consider insurance for guns. We have insurance for cars. Why would you not have insurance for something that is deadly? And the fact is that when we addressed the problem with people dying in car accidents, there was a concerted effort made by the General Assembly and the Congress to fix that through insurance issues, through seatbelt laws, through basic public safety initiatives. We should be doing the exact same thing when it comes to gun violence prevention.
Thank you.
But I had my question was very simple, though. I'm very straightforward. 21 for rifles and shotguns.
I would have, before I make a decision on any specific piece of legislation, I always read the bill. I also do all the research I can to talk to professors, talk to academics, talk to experts. So I've not seen this kind of legislation put before the General Assembly before. I would commit to you right now that if and when it is done, I will talk to you about it and give you where I stand. And you know what? So I'm not going to go down that road of talking about a hypothetical. But the fact is, based on my support from the Brady campaign and from countless folks in the sensible gun violence prevention legislation community, I would hope that you understand I'm on the side of you on this issue.
Thank you.
It's a plain language question. I can commit to it. I want to say that, the majority of names on that Vietnam Wall memorial were under 21. But the differential I would make, and as I was an infantry officer and knew the accidents that occurred with weapons, the difference is that those young men and women had training. So that's the difference. I'm of course in favor of all of the things that Delegate Lopez mentioned. But I think one important thing is that since 80% of the crimes that are committed with a handgun are weapons that are stolen or somehow gotten illegally, people who do not report the loss of a firearm should be penalized as well if the criminal gets their hands and commits a crime with that gun.
Thank you. It is for delegates to ask questions. Yes, ma'am, you're from?
Ingrid. Can you hear me? Ingrid Gant, Arlington Education Association delegate, president of the Arlington Education Association. Good evening. My question is to both of you. It's a pleasure to see you, Delegate Lopez. It's about the SOQs. SOQs, most people know them as the standards of quality. You know, and you should know that when you say we're giving Virginia a 5% increase, that's not necessarily what happens in places like Arlington and the Northern Virginia area. Can you enlighten a little bit on, do you see that ever changing? Has anyone ever thought about looking at the SOQs?
So if I have your question right, and we're talking about the distribution of funds?
Yes, sir.
Right. So Northern Virginia, I think, has been disadvantaged by the formula. So I raised this when I was being interviewed by the agricultural PAC and so on. A county like Lee County and others do not make the same level of effort that we make up here to finance local education, and the level of effort should be taken into account. So I think we're losing out in this entire area because of that. So that should be changed. To me, you're probably going to have to work a deal with the delegates from Southern Virginia in such a way that they find some advantage in it also. But right now, it needs to be changed.
Absolutely.
We need to have a fundamental overhaul of how we fund education in the Commonwealth. I've been talking about this for a couple of years now. The fact is that we have built cathedrals, Fleets, Discovery, Wakefield High School. These are amazing schools. But when you say that other Southwest and Southside counties are not trying hard enough to fund their schools, they're not just trying to pay their teachers a living salary, they're trying to fix holes in roofs. So when you have no tax base in a county of maybe 20,000 people, how do you fund the school system? So the idea that somehow they're not trying hard enough is off topic. Where we should be going is a real, frank discussion about how we fund education. Not based on recordation taxes, but based on everybody, and maybe actually increasing taxes to address some of this. Now, that's just a long conversation that needs to be studied, but and I've heard very interesting arguments on all sides. But the fact is that you're right, that there is a disparity in how funding comes back, but we are also able to fund our schools in a way that Lee County, Galax, Grundy, Danville simply cannot. As Tim Katie, my old boss, like to say, we're a Commonwealth. That means we're all in it together. So Virginia is not just Northern Virginia. It's not just Hampton Roads. It's Pennington Gap and Cumberland Gap and every nook and cranny.
Thank you. I think we're going to have to go to closing statements, please. Nicole, it is, I will let you go ahead, but I don't think you're a delegate now, are you?
Technically still.
Okay, all right, go up, right ahead. I don't mean to be snarky.
I'll change my civic association. So Nicole Merlene. So I first just want to address that. I'm sorry, the hypocrisy of your area statement where you said that women and I don't deserve equal rights, but because of divorce court, but then said that we need to stay at home during the draft. But thank you for participating in democracy, and thank you, Alfonso, for your service to the community. My question is not related to that, but actually in local government. You had a host of people here earlier telling you about the hurdles that they here have in Arlington because of the state legislature. What would you do down in Richmond to alleviate those hurdles for local government?
For local government or for local businesses?
Yeah, for Arlington that you might have heard earlier.
Okay.
Dillon Rule.
So you can go down the Dillon Rule path. You can go down, let me list a few things. There's small business procurement issues where you can make it easier for small businesses to get small business procurement like SWAN status. There's things you can do in terms of that I've actually helped push and move the boulder up the mountainside on. There's ways that you can address environmental standards, making it so that a county can actually do more than other counties in terms of environmental protection. You can do things in terms of allowing, like we talked a lot about tree canopy. I actually worked with the county on legislation a few years ago to when Washington Boulevard and the bike path and the multimodal improvements were made and they were tearing down trees. We actually worked with the county to address that and have trees replanted, thank goodness. But also think about ways we could make it so that other counties, other municipalities can address their tree canopy issues. In ways that Arlington has taken forward-looking steps on. So Dillon Rule is a very important issue. The fact that you have to go mother may I to the General Assembly. For instance, when we tried to pass same-sex partner benefits a few years ago, and it only stayed in place for a couple months, and then all of a sudden, boom, the General Assembly said we couldn't do it anymore. There are ways to address some kinds of issues with goodness, I mean, it's like you can do social safety net issues, you could do affordable housing issues. Like my legislation to create the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and we need to create a dedicated source of revenue for that. We need to actually do more in terms of affordable housing in the Northern Virginia region. While I'm still very proud of the fact that we've helped thousands of people in every corner of the Commonwealth, there is a significantly higher, greater need in Northern Virginia, especially with what's happening with density, with what's happening with Amazon, with what's happening with all these different areas that create pressure points.
Thank you.
So it's not an easy one answer thing, it's dozens of things.
Go ahead.
So to me, the most important structural change would be single-member districts. I think that it's tyranny of the majority, frankly, to have everyone elected at large. Second, I think we need a full-scale commitment to Metro. I have proposed the idea, it's more a vision than a plan right now, of having a Metro line running out to Columbia Pike, which was in the original plan back in the 1970s when Metro was created. Thirdly, I think that there's a lot of hardworking, highly intelligent people working in this system. But we need more outreach to people on the street and communicate with people a structured path to communicate with people who are less well off. We use a lot of public resources to help those people. And relating to candidate Purvis's point on education, we need to do as much as we can for both preschool and early education and do it so that our kids succeed. I think our
our standards have, across the board in this country and even in Virginia, have fallen.
Thank you. If you could make your closing statement. You want to go?
Me? Thank you all for coming this evening, and thank you to the Arlington Civic Federation for hosting. For me, there's nothing in the world as rewarding as helping people. Meeting a family that has a roof over their heads because of my Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Making it easier for veteran, women, and minority-owned small businesses to grow and thrive. Helping just one dreamer student get in-state tuition and a college degree. Working with constituents to fix Shirlington Road and develop the Washington Boulevard Bike Trail. Negotiating the deal between the Commonwealth and the developers so that our community doesn't lose the convenience of the DMV on 4 Mile Run. Making sure a constituent family doesn't lose their heat in the winter. And ensuring that the social safety net is there for future generations despite intense efforts to cut in Richmond. Going forward, we need to create more prosperity and do it in a way where everybody wins. We need to invest in our infrastructure and in our workforce, and most of all, in our children. To do that, we need experience and a deep, nuanced understanding of public policy and the legislative process in Richmond. The issues that we're going to be dealing with over the next 2 years are far too critical if we're going to keep Virginia moving forward. I will continue being a champion for our values and priorities. I will continue fighting for the community that I love, and I will continue fighting for a majority in the House that reflects our values. And I will continue fighting for a Virginia that lifts everyone up and leaves no one behind. Thank you. My name is Alfonso Lopez, and I ask for your support and vote on Election Day.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to present to you tonight. Ultimately, you're electing a person to this office, and what I'd like to say about myself is reflected in a quote that the organization for which I was executive director for 10 years, a national one. This summarizes part of it. Terry has grown up in tough areas of St. Louis, including public housing projects. Rather than hardening him, this experience seemed to have inspired him to be a very compassionate man, sensitive to diversity, race, and ethnicity. He was determined to change lives, especially those of young people. Terry is one of the most ethical and committed people I've ever met. I am not alone in my submission. She goes on to say I'm a bit stubborn. So my life has been about public service and serving people, whether it was in the armed services, 8 years on Capitol Hill, working with youth and youth development and youth crime prevention for 25 years. And also working after 40 years, essentially being the boss, working in a number of hourly jobs too. I like to say that my experience comes from the suites and the streets, that I understand people and their situations at all levels. And I think that brings something special to my candidacy. As an independent, I'm not locked into a party position, and I have a better opportunity to represent you. So I will be a visible, hardworking, committed delegate for you using my streets and suites experience. I ask for your vote, your support, and any spare change you have, because he already has enough money.
I want to thank both of you for waiting for this long time.